Joining us live now to give us some insight on these updates is former Commanding General of the Arizona National Guard and U.S. Senate candidate for the state of Arizona, General Mick McGuire. As always, good to see you, General.
Good morning, Miranda. Thanks for having me.
So, General, what kind of difference will this aid make, or will it, given the fact that the U.S. has already forked over an estimated $4 billion in total aid to Ukraine this year, and Americans are struggling with record inflation not seen in more than 40 years?
Well, I think the aid is appropriate. I hope they focus it as well on helping out the refugees and the humanitarian issues that they're facing. Unfortunately, Miranda, the shift of this battle to Donbass in the south part around Mariupol actually gives a bit of an advantage to the Russians just due to the shorter logistical lines from the Russian border. It won't change the resolve of the Ukrainian people. I've been on with you many times talking about that. Occupying a city is completely different than winning the hearts and minds. But I'm still calling on the U.S., especially Biden, to de-escalate the situation and try to get to a ceasefire. The quicker we get there, the less suffering there is, and the world is going to be a safer place. And I'm still concerned, you mentioned about inflation, the lack of ability in the east and south part of the country of Ukraine for the farmers to get their crops in. That's going to have widespread affect the U.S., affect inflation everywhere, and protracting this does not help either side.
Yeah, we've heard about this hurting farmers, especially when it comes to moving fertilizer across the country. But I want to go back to Mariupol. There are some 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers and civilians staking out in a steel plant in that city, even though Putin, as I mentioned, reportedly decided not to attack it. He's claiming victory. You just heard the president in that press briefing saying, though, there is no evidence that he has, this administration has at the moment, that that has actually happened. So what does this declaration mean?
Well, you and I talked about a month ago about Mariupol, and at that point they'd had the power off for 2 weeks. And I told you that that was the one major metropolitan area I was most concerned about, because when you cut off the power for that amount of time, and I'm not, the fog of war, it's very confusing. It's been tough getting reporting out of there. The city has been under siege. There's been a lot of mixed reporting about refugee corridors and who got out. So I think one of the things that is important there is how many people are left there to, quote, occupy, what infrastructure is left after they've bombed it mercilessly for the last 6 to 8 weeks, and what's the state of the condition of all the people there, how many are even capable of helping themselves out after being nearly starved to death and no food and water for a period of time. So I am not exactly certain what's happening there, but that city has been the site of the, I'd say, a heaviest bombing.
Now, General, you talked about you're still wanting the Biden administration to de-escalate the situation, but just yesterday Putin tested an intercontinental ballistic missile that he says should cause his enemies to stop and think about whether or not to test him. In the last 30 seconds we have remaining, what is your response, and what should the Biden administration's response be to this, what I would perceive to be a threat?
Well, it is a threat, and we've talked about this before. There needs to be de-escalation because Putin is not the kind of guy that's just going to say, well, I'm taking my bat and ball and going home. We need to bring him to the table. The problem, Miranda, is unfortunately we have failed leadership in our country. Biden is not taken seriously, and the U.S. has to have a clear, coherent message with the Russians that this has got to stop. We've got to bring people to the table. That's why I'm running for Senate, Miranda. We need leaders that understand diplomacy is part of the issue.
General, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to get your insight on this situation, and we're going to continue to follow this story. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Miranda. You have a great morning.